Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. We are talking about Women's History Month, the stories of some of the people who have shaped our city, who have shaped our state. I'm very happy to have with us Dr. Carole Bucy. She is a local historian, and I loved our first segment. So I just asked some questions. You just take it from there. I asked somebody that had been overlooked. You told us the amazing story of Sally Thomas, who I didn't know about. If you didn't catch that, go back, watch the rerun. That was great. What's another one? So let me just ask another person. Who's another woman in history that we may not know about that we should know about?
Another one is Anne Rogers Grundy. Now, she was a contemporary of Sally Thomas. She moved here from Kentucky. Her husband was a judge in Kentucky, but like so many people who moved to Nashville right around the time of the War of 1812, they came because Nashville was a boom town for land speculation. And particularly as the lands in Alabama, Mississippi, and West Tennessee get opened to settlement as a result of the victory of the United States in the War of 1812, and those Native Americans were pushed out of their ancestral lands and across over into Indian territory. You see the population of Nashville not only booming because there are all these people wanting to get to those areas that they could potentially have a plantation, but there are also people here who want to speculate in land. And so among the people who came was Felix Grundy and his wife and children. And so they moved here. They were very devoted Presbyterians, and Anne Rogers Grundy, he set up a law office here. He was regarded as one of the best criminal lawyers in, well, this was the West, remember, not just the South, but this was the West. This was the Western United States, if you can imagine that. And his wife was very active in getting the first Presbyterian church founded here. She and her oldest daughter were charter members. That was founded as Andrew Jackson is leading off our militia to fight the Native Americans down in Alabama.
Are you talking about that's the beautiful church downtown, the downtown Presbyterian church?
That is the mother church of all Presbyterian churches. And she and her daughter were charter members. I think there were a group of women and one man. Now, there was already a Methodist church here, but the Presbyterians had a hard time getting started because the Presbyterians Presbyterianism was largely the religion of the first settlers that came from East Tennessee over here to these Cumberland settlements. There was nothing in between except the Cumberland Plateau, but they were not so much interested in religiosity as they were interested in education. And so the powers that be here very early on, before Tennessee became a state, when we had just gotten Nashville started and people were living in cabins, James Robertson and some of the other leaders recruited a Presbyterian minister to come here and open a school, and they wanted their children educated. The people here from the beginning placed a high price on education. It's only natural that we might become one day the Athens of the South, and they were interested in education, and so this school eventually became Davidson Academy, and it had its fits and starts, but the point being that the Presbyterians were late getting started. Methodism worked much better on the frontier with the circuit riding preachers and the less formality that all entailed. And so the Presbyterians came in the third place in terms of the chronology because the Baptists were already here and the Methodists fledgling tiny little communities of faith. But Anne Rogers Grundy recognized there were children on the streets of Nashville, and adults too, that were illiterate. And so she had worked with a man up in Kentucky who had started getting Bibles from a Bible society in Philadelphia and had started this idea of Sunday school started in England. And so when Anne Rogers Grundy comes and she sees there's nothing of an educational nature like this, she and a Methodist preacher decide to start a Bible society here and start the first Sunday schools. Now, initially, this was not received as well as it should have been. I mean, basically, it was a literacy program. It was to keep young men in particular out of trouble and to teach basic skills of reading. And consequently, with reading follows writing. And so initially, the first Sunday schools were regarded as blasphemy, breaking the Sabbath. Now, I've always wondered
Oh, now that's interesting. Sure, you're not supposed to work on Sunday.
You're not supposed to work on Sunday.
Learning to read, it would be work.
That would teaching
would be
teaching
work.
would be work.
All right, interesting. All right.
So she gets that going, and you know, they were saying this was blasphemy. But you know, it's a funny thing. After the preachers started chewing on this, they realized that they could use it to grow their own little congregation by offering something specifically for children and young adults. And so, but soon the churches in Nashville had Sunday schools, and Mrs. Grundy was completely forgotten in her role in this story. I've often wondered if the Methodist preacher who helped her start this had been the only one doing it, and if a woman hadn't been involved, if it would have been accepted more readily. I don't know. That's
Is the Methodist preacher well known? Is this the case where he got the credit for it, or is more well known?
No, she got really more of the credit eventually than he did. But you know, it was interesting that she was the one really pushing it. And her daughters, she left a long legacy of daughters and grandchildren who made prominent roles here in the community, made contributions to our community through voluntary activities.
And so you're saying this is the person who started Sunday school?
Yeah.
Wow.
Here.
That's great. That's fascinating. And I guess, you know, big picture, I love hearing individual stories, and I'm going to ask as many as I can. But big picture, are you surprised that she was kind of swept under the rug? Or what makes this come back out? Obviously, she didn't get a lot of credit for it. Why is it now that we're hearing about this and it's kind of, we're learning about her now?
Well, I think that after the women's movement of the late 60s, with the really big push for the Equal Rights Amendment being passed, I think that really started the momentum of women's history. And in the mid-1970s, you began to see colleges offering one graduate seminar or one upper-level course in women's history. But, you know, and some for a long time, those were just regarded as those were for the girls that were the history majors. And, you know, it was, what have these people done? Which of these women have gotten elected to something? And so, or a president's wife. And, you know, that was all they really thought women's history was. And there's so much more. It's just like African American history. There is so much more to African American history than people understand at all.
So there's a historical marker for Sally Thomas.
There's a historical marker.
What about for Ann Rogers Grundy?
I don't think there's a historical marker. She has a portrait down that was at the First Presbyterian Church when the church split, and it was out on Franklin Road for a good long while, but it's now been moved back downtown, and her portrait is there in the church. But I don't think there's a historic marker for her.
Those are both great. Okay, let's take another one. Who else stands out to you? I've learned two things here. I had all kinds of notes, but I'm fascinated by everything you're saying.
Right.
So who else stands out to you?
Well, for example, everybody in Nashville probably knows the name of Fanny Battle, because for many, many years, this Fanny Battle Day Home raised money every Christmas for this, basically a child care center for parents that didn't have enough to pay for daycare. And so the big fundraiser was Fanny Battle caroling at Christmas time, and there was a literal army of hundreds of people who organized caroling groups and went door to door in the neighborhood, singing wherever they lived, all parts of Davidson County, singing to raise money for Fanny Battle. And so what was known about her was that she started this nice day home for these children who lived around a cotton mill and needed more structure because their mothers and fathers were working in the cotton mills here in town. And so what people don't know is that she was an ardent Confederate supporter. She had grown up down in the Cane Ridge area of southeast Davidson County. Her brothers enlisted in the Confederate Army. Her father enlisted in the Confederate Army. 2 of her brothers were killed at the Battle of Shiloh. Her father was imprisoned. He was captured and imprisoned and spent a good bit of the war in a Union Army prison. And so she, along with a lot of other women, became Confederate spies within the city of Nashville, because one thing that Nashvillians don't really quite understand about the Civil War here is that the Union Army came in to Nashville in February 1862, right after the fall of Fort Donelson, downstream here on the Cumberland River towards the Kentucky border. And when Fort Donelson fell, there were not enough soldiers to defend the capital of our state. And so our governor, Isham G. Harris, and the legislature left town as soon as Fort Donelson fell, because they knew the Union Army was coming into Nashville and there were no soldiers to defend the city. And as a result of this, Nashville was surrendered by the mayor of the city. He was the only one left. Now,
wow. Okay.
There was no Battle of Nashville, and that does not take place for 2.5 years until the end of the Civil War. So meanwhile, the Union Army makes Nashville into one of the very safest places you can be in the Confederacy, because as long as you take the oath of allegiance, or the males in the family take the oath of allegiance to the Union Army, you will be left alone and can go about your own business. Now, ironically, most of the preachers refused to take the oath of allegiance, so there were very few churches open here during the Civil War, but there were some. And so here are these women here who can go about their business. You know, Mrs. Polk is a widow, but she's the grande dame of the city. She's an ardent Confederate supporter, but she keeps that close to her heart and doesn't flaunt it in front of the Union Army and every general that comes to town, while our capital is Fort Andrew Johnson pays a courtesy call on Mrs. Polk. But here is Fanny Battle, who is finding documents and you know, doing all this spy work, and she is ultimately arrested and imprisoned herself for a while. And to me, that's quite remarkable that, you know, we talk a lot about the Battle of Nashville, and we talk about, you know, the Shies Hill out there on the south side, that big ridge out there, and General John Bell Hood, the Confederate general, locating his army at the top of the hill rather than the military top of the hill, which was a disaster for the Army of the Confederacy, as the Union Army was able to destroy the Army. But the Confederate Army of Tennessee tried to retake the city from Corinth, Mississippi after the city fell. They tried again from up in Kentucky, then from Murfreesboro in December 1862, failed again, then got down to Chattanooga, Chickamauga and Chattanooga. They didn't come back this way until 1864, when John Bell Hood becomes the general of the Confederate Army of Tennessee and starts this grand plan to come up from Alabama, Franklin, and liberate Nashville.
And so she was behind basically enemy lines, and she was working to help the Confederates retake this city.
Yes, that's exactly
spy.
right.
Oh my goodness. So it's like story time. It's like story time tonight. All right, we're going to take a break. We have some calls, so I'll start taking some calls, I promise. We'll take some calls right after this.